know that sexuality is something, right? Who people are attracted to, right, is something that sometimes isn't treated universally well in our culture. And unfortunately, in our churches, sometimes who people are attracted to defines how we treat them, right? And that's what we're going to spend today talking about, is what the church thinks, just the church, of the spectrum of who people are attracted to. Tonight, we're not going to talk to you about our personal opinion. I have really great opinions. I'm really good at soapboxing it, but we're not going to do that tonight. Our only goal tonight is to talk about what the church teaches. I'd like to tell you a little bit about why this became so important to me, if that's okay. I'm going to spend a few minutes of your time, because I think it's important to talk about some of our experiences before we get into talking about the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Good? So when I was 19 years old, I went to Franciscan University of Steubenville, and actually I was 20, and I did an internship in Littleton, Colorado. And while I was at this internship, I was working for a parish. I was invited to volunteer at a youth conference. So I went to a youth conference that had probably 2,000 or 3,000 young people in it. And while I was there, I was stepped outside for a moment, and there was a teenager that was sitting on the curb. And he looked angry. You know how there's people that sometimes just look angry? He looked angry. At that time, I was learning about how to be a catechist, so I was excited. I was going to test out my catechist skills. So I sat down next to him and I said, "Hi, my name is Mary, what's yours?" He said, "My name is David." I said, "You don't look real happy to be here." And he said, "I'm not. I hate the Catholic Church." So I took a second and I said, "Well, it's for one of three things: birth control, abortion, or homosexuality," right? Because we know those are our hot buttons, right? And he said, "It's homosexuality, I'm gay, and I hate the Catholic Church." And I took a second as I was talking to him, and I tried to explain what the church teaches. Well, the church loves you, David, right? And the church says a lot about sexuality. It's all really beautiful. And he looked at me and he said, "Are you telling me that the church is calling me to be alone my whole life?" And when he said that, I felt like somebody punched me in the stomach. I tell people at the time, I was going through a very dramatic college breakup, and my heart was broken, and I really wondered if I was going to be alone my whole life. There's nothing scarier than thinking you are, than thinking your life is going to be spent alone. And when he said that, I realized the topic has to do with sex. The topic has to do with who we're attracted to. But the topic also has to do with our fundamental need to fill a loneliness. And sometimes we don't talk about that need. That was the defining moment in my life. When I was 22, that's when I started to think about this. When I was 22, I started working at Mercy High School. And I tell people, and it's true, I was young, like right out of college, to the point like where my first day, I sat in a little chair in my office and it spun. And I sat and it spun around. I'm like, "I'm a teacher! I'm a Miss Buckley!" That was my name at the time. It was very exciting. And I really do think, because I was young and I was at this school, the students used to kind of flock to me with questions, right? So every day, Mercy High School had modular scheduling, which meant that they'd have off hours, right? So every day I'd have at least 5 or 6 kids in my office just asking me questions. It was a really neat time in ministry. And of course, as per always, the topic or the question of homosexuality came up, right? So I was in my office with probably about 10 girls, and I decided I was just going to read them what the catechism said. Here's what the catechism says. And actually, our catechism, who has read what the catechism has to say about homosexuality? We're going to talk about it tonight. It's so beautiful. It's so awesome. So I read what our catechism said, and I felt good about it. And I cleared up a lot of myths, right? And everybody left except for one student. And she looked at me, and she said, "Are you saying that my dad is intrinsically disordered?" Right? Intrinsically disordered is a, can you hear me in the back? That would be the first time ever that I wasn't heard. Intrinsically disordered is an expression in the catechism. We're going to talk about it tonight. And when I was talking, it didn't matter what I said. once I said intrinsically disordered, because I was talking about this student's dad. She said to me, "Are you telling me that my father is intrinsically disordered?" And in my head I went, ah. Because if I knew I was talking about her dad, I probably would have said the same content, but I would have said it differently, because I was talking about her dad. So at that point in my ministry, I decided I was never going to talk about homosexuality publicly with large groups. Isn't that funny, considering what I do now, right? I decided the risk was too great, because I could say the right thing, right, in a way that I thought was healthy and good and in line with the church teaching, and somebody could hear it in a way that would be dangerous to them, and I was not willing to take that risk. So from that point on, I stopped talking about homosexuality in large groups. Now, I still invited people to come and talk to me about it. So in my youth program, I would say all the time, if you have questions, come and talk to me, right? I felt comfortable handling questions on a one-on-one basis. But as far as large groups, no way. Because there's no way, I decided, that you could talk about this topic in a way that was healthy. The third story I'd like to tell you is a young person that was in my youth program. And when he was 16 years old, he said to me, "Mary, I'm gay." And I said, "No, you're not, you're John," because that's always my answer, right? When young people come out of the closet, I remind them of their name, because we're all more than our sexuality, right? And we started a relationship, and we spent a lot of time, him and I, talking about who he was attracted to and what that meant in his life. We spent years talking about it. He went on to the University of Michigan. He studied religion and sexuality, right? And John, we call him John, his philosophies and understanding of sexuality, particularly in the light of the Catholic Church, don't match up to mine. But we'd spent a lot of time in dialogue, years. After about 5 or 6 years, John was 22, 23 years old. This was just a couple of years ago. And again, he wanted to talk to me about homosexuality in the Catholic Church. And I was like, "Brother, I'm done having this conversation with you," right? I said to him, "Here's the thing. We've talked this out. You know where I stand. I know where you stand. At this point, we don't need to keep having the same conversation." And he said something to me that has changed my whole thinking on our church's dialogue on homosexuality. He said, "Mary, you're the only person I can talk to about this." He said, "If I talk to one group of people, they tell me something's wrong with me, something's disgusting, I need to change who I am. It's like if I talk to another group of people, they tell me the Catholic Church is awful, and to even consider being a Catholic is going against who you are and you shouldn't do it." He said, "Mary, depending on who I go talk to in confession, I hear one of those two answers. I hear priests say, 'Hey, do what you want, the church is backwards.' Or I hear priests say, 'You're disgusting and you have a disorder and you need to change.' He said, 'You're the only person I can talk to. You can't not talk to me.'" It changed my view on homosexuality. That conversation, having it, really led me to deep prayer about how I went about the ministry of working with people. And I decided, with absolutely no proof backing more studies, that this particular teaching is driving people away in droves. It's driving young people away more than we even care to admit. I think this is the teaching that if we did it better, people would be more willing to engage in a relationship with Christ, but because we do it poorly, people want nothing to do with the Catholic Church. People cannot reconcile a God they know to be about love with a teaching they perceive to be about hate. And until we work on allowing people to fully understand what our teaching teaches, and our teaching isn't easy, right? The faith isn't easy. There is a cross that is part of who we are. But until we get better about teaching what the church actually teaches, we're not going to be able to address people that are flying away from our faith. I decided that I would start talking about homosexuality publicly right? And I would take that risk. It was funny because I realized the more conversations I had with young people in particular, but also older people, the more I realized most people don't know what the church actually teaches, right? And people are basing their judgments on what they think the church teaches, on what they've heard the church teaches, without spending any time in the catechism of the Catholic Church. And that's when I decided, you guys, I sat at my desk at St. John Newman, and I had my catechism on one side and my Bible on the other, and I was going to do this meeting for the first time with my young people in a public setting. It's about 3 years ago. And I was like, Lord, help, right? And then I thought of the television show Mythbusters. Has anybody seen Mythbusters? All right, it's a television show. They take a concept that people heard, that people think they know about, and they prove whether or not that concept is true or false. How easy is that? So based on that, we put together, I think it's a 22 question, I should probably know this, a 22 question quiz, and we're going to talk about that in a second. I want to tell you one more thing, because I have 2 more minutes and I use all of my time. Like a year and a half ago, the Holy Father, Pope Francis, was interviewed, and Pope Francis, just so you know, is my best friend. He doesn't know it, he's my best friend, right? Everything he says, I'm like, oh, I want to be your best friend, right? So he said in an interview, somebody asked him about homosexuality in the context of the priesthood and different things, and they had asked him this question. He was famously quoted as saying, "Who am I to judge?" How many of you remember that? Yeah. Who am I to judge? Oh my gosh. Social media went crazy the next day, right? Everybody said, the church is changing your teaching. The church is finally welcoming gay people. It was like nuts, right? So at first, I was angry. Because, of course, in my head, I'm like, duh, that's what the church has always taught, that we cannot judge people, right? We do not have the tools to judge with the mind of God. Praise you, Jesus, right? And so I was so mad that so many people, so many news outlets were being so irresponsible, right? And so many people were just taking my church basically and mocking it with no knowledge. But then I had a pause. And I realized most people were not misquoting the Holy Father. The quote that they were using was, "Who am I to judge?" And that surprised our culture. Our culture was surprised that we are not a church that is in the business of making judgments on the eternal soul of people. We are a church that gives paths to freedom. Praise you, Jesus. But we are not a church that teaches that I, Mary Wilkerson, would ever have the ability to judge you on whether or not you're going to heaven. And I realized that that was surprising to people. That was surprising. A gay friend that I know really well commented on somebody. Somebody said, you know, I'm so mad that everybody's acting like this is a big deal because it's not a big deal. And a gay friend that I know commented and said, we've never heard it like that from someone like him. It's a big deal. People in the LGBTQ, we have a lot of letters, community, right? They're feeling like they might just have a place in this church because of what Pope Francis is doing right now. And it's scaring a lot of people, and I'm sure we'll have some questions about the synod, because woo, that got out of control last week, right? We might have some questions about it. It's scaring people. Pope Francis promised us life was about to get messy, because love is messy. The catechism's clear though, and that's what we're going to spend this next section of time talking about.